Welcome to Future Left Podcast. I'm Adam Simpson here as always with Casey Rogers. Casey, how you doing? Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
I'm kidding. I'm doing good. I was trying to be dramatic.
Oh, okay. It's very dramatic effect. We're here today. We're gonna be talking about our Ask the Robot question Q&A with some very special guests, the Singularity Bros. We have with us now. It feels weird if there's only one guy clapping, but
we have a horse.
It sounded sarcastic.
The sound of one guy clapping.
Yeah. We're here with Zach and Scott. Tom, the third of the Singularity Bros, will be joining us. But just so everyone can identify you by like when you're speaking, Zach, say hi for us.
Hi, this is Zach.
That's Zach, everyone. And Scott, how you doing today?
Hi, this is Zach. This is Scott.
Oh, you messed it up.
Scott.
It happens. It happens. It's all right. So we're talking about our Ask the Robot question Q&A. It was this big initiative we had where we tried to get workforce automation asked at the presidential debates. We all know how that went.
It was a rousing success.
We failed.
I actually don't know how it went because I didn't watch any of the debates.
Well, that's probably how I should have done it. I just gritted my teeth through like 8 hours of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton talking to each other. So. But they did not ask it. Not Lester Holt, who's my guy. I thought he was my sure thing, but no, let me down. But before we get into the Q&A, I just want to go over a few things. Obviously, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at @future_left. You can also find the Singularity Bros at singularitybros.com. They're also on Facebook and they're on Twitter at Singularity Bros. And be sure to check them out. Got a great show. Got some great guests recently as well. I saw Kate McFarland, and there was a really cool conversation about the future of drug laws. Right, guys? Who did you talk to about that one?
That was Mark A.R. Kleiman, who I think is formerly with NYU. Although he may still be working with them. He just has relocated to the West Coast. Okay.
Yeah. No, that was a really cool conversation. It's a subject that we haven't really tackled yet, so I really enjoyed listening to it. But be sure to check them out at singularitybros.com. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So we did this Q&A. We had 6 participants in the Q&A. Andy Stern, author of Raising the Floor about basic income. Charlie Oliver, CEO of Serve Fresh Media. Ryan Event, author of The Wealth of Humans, one of the newer books about workforce automation that you should definitely check out. John Donaher, who is a fellow at IEET, and I should have written this down. Do you guys know what his podcast is called?
It's called
off the top of your head?
Algocracy and Transhumanism.
There you go.
Algocracy and Transhumanism podcast. There
it is. John Donaher. Be sure to check out that podcast. Kevin LeGrander, also a fellow at IEET, and of course David Towle of quantumrun.com. So we'll just jump right into it. We're going to be discussing the questions and the feedback we got with the Singularity Bros. And so question 1. The next presidential administration could potentially last until 2025. Are there any specific disruptions that you'd highlight for policymakers to be aware of? And guys, obviously you didn't comment on these questions, so I'm most interested in hearing your perspective. So any particular disruptions in terms of technology and automation that you think politicians should be more worried about than they seem to be?
I think the obvious one is probably self-driving cars.
Right. I think that was the most common response on the Q&A as well.
It is the most here now.
Yeah.
I think technology. I live in Pittsburgh, and
right.
The self-driving Ubers kind of hit the streets here first. So I've been seeing them on the road now for months. They're just a part of my everyday life now. So it's not a matter of when will self-driving technology be here. It's very much here.
Yeah.
But it's when will it penetrate the rest of society enough that we start seeing a radical transformation. And that could be, I think we on the show we talked about a study out of Forrester that said 6 years would be the time frame for this. So if that's the case, and you've put now some 3 million people, I think, are employed directly driving, and maybe 8 to 10 million are employed kind of servicing that industry.
Right.
And if all of a sudden 10 million people are permanently unemployed, you have a catastrophe on your hands. And it doesn't seem to be anything anyone's even made a single step towards addressing.
Right. No, it's interesting. And of course you pointed out that there are millions of jobs connected to it. Small towns dotted across the United States along trucking routes. And it's really strange how no one is talking about the driverless car issues. I was actually surprised when I saw that Uber was already piloting the program in Pittsburgh. Are they still doing that, by the way?
Oh yeah, yeah, they're all over the streets here.
Okay,
Yeah.
I know there was some sort of uproar about basically like the passengers being somewhat unwilling guinea pigs. Not that they were unwilling, but they hadn't exactly signed on to help pilot the program.
I hadn't heard that, but that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So like you call an Uber and a car with no one in it shows up, is what you're saying? You're not aware that that's going to happen?
But I think they no, well, first of all, I think all of them have a guy in
Yeah.
the car to take over, but
That's
I
disappointing.
think that they're offering those rides for free.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm
Wow.
not sure if that's true. I think that was true at least when they initially launched.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I know they've been talking about once they get more driverless cars that would dramatically reduce the price of rides. But they kept saying, the CEO, Travis Kalanick, kept saying that they wouldn't lose any of their current drivers because they'd still need them for different kinds of roads and different kinds of trips. And probably, depending on how regulators approach this issue, they might be required to have someone in there in any event. So there does seem to be, but in my mind, what I took away from that kind of was that even though technically people will still be employed, they would be making much less money, even if it does go exactly
Right.
how Kalanick says it will.
Yeah, I think that's likely, and I think I heard that you guys talking on a recent episode of yours about the idea of making Uber a publicly owned company.
Yeah.
I think that those models are interesting. I mean, I'm not exactly sure about the full fallout of what happened in Austin, where they gave Uber the boot, but
I mean, Uber really gave themselves the boot in Austin, which is the weird thing because it's apparently a pretty big market. Austin's a pretty big tech town, and there was basically something on the ballot by a referendum about regulations that Uber was fighting, and they dumped millions of dollars, them and Lyft actually, and the voters still went for it. They voted in these regulations, many of them having to do with background checks and things like that for ride sharing apps. And Uber was like, government ain't gonna tell me what to do, and they left, and they pretty much just ditched their independent contractors who make them all their money when they did it as well.
They've also made kind of no mystery out of the fact that they want to go to a fully autonomous
Right.
system. Like I think if they can get away with not having those independent contractors, they're not going to try to keep them around. And I
Sure.
feel like this is one of those fallacies that's made talking about job loss in the future anyway. It's like, well, there's special circumstances and special ways of thinking. Like Einstein used creativity to discover things. So there'll always be jobs for people like that. It's like, yeah, there'll always be jobs for Einstein.
Right, yeah.
Everybody doesn't now get the job of being
way to
Einstein.
go, Einstein.
Like, so maybe they still need drivers to drive in like specialized conditions, but are the exact same amount of people going passenger four-wheeling now? Like, probably not.
Right.
So even
And
if you kept some fraction, it's not going to be most.
And
there
it's
seems
like
to be an adage in solving a lot of mysteries, which is follow the money. And Zach lives in Pittsburgh, and I lived there from 2005 to 2015, and we watched as a lot of that shit happened. I mean, Pittsburgh's home to CMU, which is like one of the premier robotics institutes, and Uber basically bought out like all of their top AI talent and robotics talent. Set up their factory there, and it's it's no surprise that they're kind of trialing this program there. But yeah, I mean, while people are like still debating within kind of like mainstream media coverage of this whether this technology is possible, even like you can just see all of the money flowing toward it.
Right.
And it's sort of like while I would love to see this go forward, generally the self-driving public transportation, especially, I sort of don't want Uber to get this because of the sort of open disdain they've shown for their non-employees. Like they seem like they can't wait. They already don't treat them like valued employees now, and they can't wait to get rid of them and replace them. And I almost feel like I don't want them to have that.
Right.
Yeah, I'm of the same two minds. I feel the same way about Amazon, and I feel like
Drone delivery.
yeah, I feel like Uber and Amazon are at least pioneering these technologies that could become infrastructure for like a much more convenient, connected,
Yeah.
just pleasant to live in world. But
Sure.
they do have utter disregard for their workers, and if we're going to move in that direction at their expense, I'd like them to be compensated in some way.
Right.
Yeah, I mean my sense of it is that their perspective toward their employees and the is that they are a cost. They're a labor cost, and they want to reduce that cost. It's not that they're these are livelihoods, and these are people that they run these businesses with and provide these services with. It's something that they'd like to get rid of so they can get more money. And even though I have a lot of disdain for that philosophy, whether it's true or not, we can debate it. But it's not. It's certainly not. I don't know, outside the lines in terms of our economic system more broadly. No one well, a lot of people do now, but for the longest time, Walmart has been cutting labor costs in different ways, and people really didn't bat an eye. So in other industries, a lot of other people get a pass for reducing labor costs and quote unquote increasing productivity. So it's the kind of thing I have a lot of disdain for what Uber's doing, but it's not really unique in our current system.
Yeah, as long as we're expanding this conversation to automation generally, here in Massachusetts, there's been a big upheaval of the highway system where they've gotten rid of the toll booths. So like everyone's on the automated, the Easy Pass thing, or they just get a huge ticket. I don't know if it's a huge ticket. Maybe Tom knows, but yeah, it's fascinating because I'm in places that like I'm at the gym talking to people who are not particularly tech interested or like sci-fi futurism, anything like that, and all of a sudden they're like, what's happening to the toll booth workers? I heard those were really great jobs.
Yeah, I can't imagine that being a toll booth worker is a really great job. I do want to note really quick that Tom has joined us. So welcome to the show, Tom. Glad you could make it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. The hunt was hot.
So economists, thinkers, and beyond have been concerned about technological unemployment for centuries. What, if anything, is different about trends in automation today? Gentlemen.
I think the obvious answer is artificial intelligence and processing power.
Right.
Kind of working synergistically. I mean, yeah, we've had automation before, but not automation potentially that could solve problems on its own.
Right. It's interesting. That was something that both Charlie Oliver and John Danaher pointed to in the Q&A, is that it's not just what's different this time is that there are so many different things that are converging right now. The synergy, like you said, AI, robotics, the Internet of Things, and it's just dramatically broadening the scope of what's being able to happen. And actually, David Tall pointed out, and this is something that we haven't really talked about on our podcast, is that I don't know how close it is, but quantum computing, he pointed out, it's gonna be like rocket fuel for the kind of advancement and the range of disciplines that automation can affect.
One of my favorite episodes we did was with a show listener who contacted us on Twitter or started following and sharing stuff, and I got to talking with him over Google, and it turns out he's actually a PhD candidate in neurobiology, but he works primarily with machine learning, and he gave us a really great kind of summary history of machine learning. And this is one of those things where it's like we're approaching the elbow of an exponential curve. It's not really that there hasn't been progress. I mean, the way AI gets reported often is like it's been in this long state of dormancy, and now all of a sudden like they figured out the iPhone. But yeah. I mean, really what's happening is like this confluence of now like the sophistication of the technology plus the just raw horsepower of the systems that run it, and that like we're now reaching that inflection point, and I think there's no turning back. Like that's just going to get more and more startling and impressive with every month, week.
Right.
Well, I also wanted to ask, so what do you guys think about the idea that as the pace of technology increases, it used to be that, maybe 500 years ago, the rate of technological advancement was relatively slow, very slow. I mean, from generation to generation, that
almost undetectable, really.
Right, and that we sort of had an opportunity to absorb these technological advancements, integrate them into our lives, and sort of be able to have a healthy relationship with them. Whereas now it seems like the pace has increased, and it almost seems like we're getting a little bit alienated by our inability to keep up. And we're it's like we either, I feel like sometimes it seems like it's creating an unhealthy balance there. Do you think there's some sort of barrier to the human ability to process technological advancement and change at a certain rate?
Before I answer that, I just wanted to mention the name of that guest I was just referring to, and that was Henry Wolf VII, also known as @Chaotic Neural. But yeah, to address this question, I think one of my favorite ways this has been explored was in the Wait But Why essay on superintelligence, where he kind of broke down these phases in history as like so shocking you would die kind of moments. So like how far back would you have to go for like such an oh shit moment? And those moments have been like clumping together closer and faster toward the end of history, not the end of history as like neoliberalism.
Right.
Like we really do have, I mean, we weren't making, we weren't in the business of making a particularly adaptable, resilient citizenry anyway. And now we need one more than ever. Like
right.
Every 10 years, 5 years, like who knows how quickly those paradigm shifts are going to start coming. We're going to need to like reinvent ourselves. I mean, people are talking about how we have no idea how to educate children for the world of 20 years from now. So, yeah.
I think the model needs to be sort of massively upended, and we haven't done that yet. We haven't really made a significant change in a lot of our social institutions. So I think, we see that the real impetus for that is on the horizon. And obviously it's already present and current amongst us, but it's not going to happen immediately. But when it does happen, and I think part of the fun of doing these podcasts is sort of conjecturing as to what it's going to actually look like, I think it'll start to account for the speed of change that you guys are talking about. And the kids that are growing up in those new environments will be able to account for the speed of that change. The evolution just basically of how the human mind adapts to and deals with this massive technological change will be both aided by the technological change itself,
right,
but also be aided by just sort of the new cultural mores and social institutions that grow up in that new world.
Right.
Tom, how young do you think those kids are who will be able to like comfortably live in this new world? Do you think they exist now? And if so, like how old do you think they are?
I mean, I would be comfortable with taking a shot at a guess and saying that they're probably alive now. I'd say they're probably somewhere between newborn and 10 years old.
So not us.
I don't.
Well, and it won't be a single world that these kids are living. I mean, the skill they will need is not to live in a world that looks a certain way, but a world that's constantly changing. And right. I think that's a skill that we have never evolved the skill to this point of actively rising to meet such fast-paced innovation. And I think it's going to be something that we're going to have to start doing consciously. I mean, I'm sure it'll eventually start naturally happening just as a means of necessity, but it's one of those things you wish would sort of take the reins now, and sort of make it part of the curriculum of public education. Teaching those skills of engaging actively with finding out about new technology, finding out about advancements in science.
just a little wrinkle in this. Ryan Event, in his response, he kind of suggested that, you know, when this like a car came along and displaced a horse and carriage, you know, there was a lot of elasticity to how much more people could be educated. Or during the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of new like mental skills people had to get because their physical skills weren't as useful. And suffice it to say, during the 1800s, we had a lot of room to grow in terms of intelligence. But in the 21st century, that might not be the case. He kind of suggested that that basically human intelligence doesn't increase as fast as we've seen machine intelligence increase. And there's a certain point to where we're not going to be able to get skills that can go beyond what machines are doing, or that can complement them in ways that would provide more jobs, as is the narrative. And I know you guys have talked about this a lot, because again, the question is kind of going back to people that say, you know, people said this about industrial looms and stuff like that. And there's referred to, of course, the Luddites. But people have been saying for centuries or whatever that technology will kill jobs, and it's never the case. So
can I vent for a second?
Please do.
The thing that is pissing me off now more than anything in this kind of futurist space, amongst at least the automation skeptics, is the the constant invocation of some creative labor as like where we're all going to move. So it's like, we won't need people to do like this kind of tedious routine cognitive labor, but we'll always need someone to like design the games or the movies, or like, you know, it's like everyone's going to become an artist. And I'll say, as a person that thinks he's just not creative at all, I'm terrified of this future where like if you can't make art, you just starve to death.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on both of the things you said, one of the important points here that I think a lot of people miss, or at least aren't talking about, is exponential improvement. You said I can't remember his name now, but
Ryan Event.
Yeah, that machines or human intelligence isn't increasing as fast as machine intelligence. And I think that is like the whole point of this. If one of these intelligences is increasing at an exponential rate, even if it's not as smart as us now, people are like, that computer can barely play Go. It's not really intelligent. Well, that thing's getting twice as intelligent every year, and I'm not.
Right.
And humans aren't.
Yeah.
Like we aren't going
I'm
to
doing the
increase
opposite,
our
I'll say.
yeah. So that, while we may feel superior now and think, like Scott said, humans will always have a place as long as there's the arts. And I think even some futurists concede that. Like, oh yeah, well, there'll always need to be human to be artists. But also with that, most people can't just become artists overnight. We shouldn't expect our entire population to have to be Da Vinci to
just
survive.
An art-based economy.
Well, gentlemen, that's why we have to get away from a capital-based economy and seize the means of production, overthrow the. Sorry, what happened? Where am I?
I like.
We were talking about gulags. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Right.
but I think that does. I think that does make the argument for. I mean, it doesn't make the argument, but that's where the idea of the Star Trek: The Next Generation future, where money is not a thing anymore, and you know the point of life is self improvement and the seeking of knowledge, and a lot of people are like, okay, settle down, hippie. But when you start thinking about it, where are we? Like you said, you can't just become an artist. If everyone's going to be artists, you don't just become that overnight. When you've been a mechanic, and they're now okay, well, you got to go play the cello now.
And how long's the window that human art will even flourish for anyway, if computers continue and machine intelligence continues to get twice as smart? Like at a certain point, it will also be twice as creative, and then we just lose that also. I mean...
Yeah, typically the argument is always that, machines will free us up to do whatever we want. But the reality is it might keep us from doing things we want. I mean, the coal industry that declined. There are people in West Virginia that are pissed because they can't go into a mine and kill themselves for 12 hours a day.
It's their only means of survival.
That's true. Given the current context, maybe we shouldn't, disparage them. But and that's not my intention. But
I think Adam's argument is they shouldn't be in that position to where their choices are doing nothing and getting black lung.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah.
But the thing is, technology, by its very nature, and I feel like this gets overlooked in a lot of the purely economic analyses, by its nature is labor saving. And there we do have an instance where technology is labor saving. It's it's putting these people out of jobs. That's labor saving. The thing is, we just don't have an economic system that is protecting them or distributing any of that bounty, those gains to them.
Right.
It all just funnels into fewer and fewer pockets.
No, I mean
that's right. In order for this to work, you'd need to sort of wholesale replace all labor overnight in all industries with automation in order for everybody to be on an equal playing field, and that's just not going to happen as long as it's going one industry at a time,
right?
One sector at a time.
The way that I normally think of this is that we can all be artists, we can all pursue our own passions. As Casey said, we're not going to get there overnight. And you read a lot of things like I this is super nerdy, but I was reading The Economic Possibilities of Our Grandchildren by John Keynes, and he was saying that
I love that essay.
I actually couldn't stand it. And I'll tell you why. Because at one point he's like 100 years from now, he's writing in 1930, and he's like, we're gonna have X, Y, and Z, and I don't even think he says robot at all, but he suggests that basically we'll get so productive that people won't have to work very much, etc. But he says, like, basically for now, avarice and precaution and compound interest must be our gods, or something like that, or we must worship in order to get there. And what I keep coming back to is, like, we're not going to just transition very quickly into a post-work or a post-money or whatever society that we're talking about.
Like, we're just looking for the right.
Yeah, I know. I don't see how we end up in this, the fully automated luxury communism thing that Nick Cernick and Alex Williams talk about. If we try to write it out on compound interest rates and avarice is the main problem I had with the essay. Other than that, I really liked it. I just why do we have to depend on avarice? And I
want my gray communist jumpsuit.
Yeah. So that's what I'm always skeptical about. Like, I don't see how we, and you're right, in the context right now where either you work or you starve, you will find some way to sell your labor. You'll find someone to dance for. You'll find someone to, sweep their driveway. You'll find something to do because you have to eat. And
it will be dehumanizing.
Yeah, this is my, obviously I think all of our fears is that if we depend on this work structure, that it's going to get more and more dehumanizing. Like TaskRabbit. You guys are familiar with TaskRabbit, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We
that talked about it in one episode where people were made to leave. That might have been Postmates, where it was like, make sure you're not around for whoever picks up the package, because they don't want to see that there's a human on the other end of this, and they were like told to leave the package, don't knock on the door. So dehumanizing is actually a really good way to put that, because I've heard so many people ask, like, well, if we don't have jobs, like, who are we as people? That's what being human is. And you just pointed out very clearly that most jobs that people have are in fact dehumanizing. It's removing the things that makes them human to have them do a task they wouldn't otherwise choose to do, for the most part. I mean, some people do things they want, but that's the same thing with being an artist. It's okay if we have a future where the only thing left for people to do is art. They shouldn't have to do art to survive, though.
Right.
It can be like a thing they want to do.
Something you get to do, not something you have to do.
Right. If now it's like I have to go work in the art mines, that's how like being an artist is. Like, no.
The old art gulag.
The art mines.
Yeah.
In the tunnels beneath Prague.
Question 3 is, what are the immediate benefits of increased automation, and how can we maximize these benefits to ensure they are felt widely was the question. And I will point out, John Donaher actually pointed out he didn't use these words, but he suggested like we'll be related to what we're just saying, kind of liberated from the toil that we all end up doing.
Toil. That's the big word.
Yeah,
that's the big word. Like if you have a calling and a passion, and that's what you do for your life. But like people shouldn't have to, go to a job. Sorry. Continue.
No, you're absolutely right. But he does say at the same time there are problems, as you said, like because your job is so tied to your identity. Like I don't know why I enjoy this anecdote, but my former neighbor, his last name Schumacher. It's because the fucker's family used to make shoes. Like their whole identity was about making shoes, so they named themselves Schumacher. You know what I mean? Like this was like a central component of human identity for centuries, and now work is just shifting so wildly.
Well, those people were craftsmen too, though, right? And they're basically artists as well.
Yeah.
If you're a shoemaker by trade at a time where crafts were highly valued or trades were highly valued, then you could take enough pride in something like that to name yourself after it.
Right.
But like, who's going to name themselves like Ronald TaskRabbit?
Yeah.
Like that's not a thing that you want on your family crest.
I know that some of the guys that I know that still identify with their employment positions in their careers, but I think that even the generation younger than us, and who knows about the one younger than us, younger than them, I just feel like that's falling apart. That's why we're talking about these part-time work economies and people changing jobs all the time. I think it's falling apart for a lot of us that don't have very stable situations at work. So it only really makes sense that that's going to continue to be the situation. And I think that we get carried away with automation and with this idea of the post-work economy to some extent, because I think we're excited about the potential for it. I mean, I certainly am. I fucking hate going to work. And I have, by all intents and purposes, I have a pretty cushy middle-class job. Like, I have nothing really to complain about. So the toil of going to work at fucking McDonald's for 40 hours a week, that really fucking blows, and not being able to make ends meet. Fuck all that noise. But yeah, I guess it'll make it easier potentially at McDonald's. I guess maybe we'll be able to get rides a little bit easier. I don't really know sort of out of the gate here how much easier automation is going to make life.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is like all of these new forms of work, they give them such like these nice names like sharing economy and the on-demand economy, and it's like we talked about earlier. There's you deliver a package, and this guy's like, I don't want to see you though, and I don't want to smell you. If you could just leave it on my door and run away, that'd be great. The whole thing has always kind of struck me as dehumanizing and somewhat extractive, because the way the middleman app kind of things work. It's always been a little bizarre. But just more broadly about this question, the benefits of automation, Ryan Event does suggest that, of course, costs will probably come down because we'll be able to mass produce things more, which one wrinkle for me is I'm concerned about the environmental effects of that, which is kind of out of left field, because I wonder about mass production and the ecological problems we're having now, if that means more waste and if that means more perhaps more abundant market goods, but more scarcity in the natural world, I guess you might say. And I also wanted to mention that Andy Stern suggested, like, put it this way: we can't let fate or the market decide the winners and losers of increased productivity, which I thought was interesting. Obviously, he's former head of a union, but it's as close to seize the means of production as we got in the Q&A. So I wanted to highlight that comment.
The vanguard is alive.
Yeah. All I'm saying is there is a specter haunting Europe. That's all I'm trying to get across.
Here's
Good God.
Here's an interesting data point I encountered recently in the Boston Globe, and that is that 15% of the American workforce meets the gig definition. So only 15% of that 15% has used a digital platform like one of these, like Uber or something. But really, that's a startlingly high percent of our workforce that is not in a union, is not in a salaried position, doesn't have benefits for the most part, and you can do it very well for yourself as freelance or um, gig in that the more general descriptor, but those are also the kinds of positions that we have the least allegiance to. And the moment we have an app or a clever piece of hardware that does what a gig worker does, what a freelance worker does, they're out.
I don't know. I see that it's weird that you see like the gig economy and stuff. It's mentioned as like, isn't it awesome? Like whenever you want something, some guy that's waiting by his phone so he can feed his family will just come and do it for you.
Guys use the.
I think it is the gig economy is awesome for the consumer.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the purchasing end, it's great. I mean, we might be able to have Uber rides for a nickel to the moon in 10 years. Like, awesome. And that kind of thing might continue to increase. Like Amazon is just so fucking convenient and sometimes super cheap.
You guys use the term dehumanizing for a lot of these jobs, and I think that is true. And I think we all kind of feel that in our gut. Like nobody really, except for like my fucking grandmother, but like nobody really likes to be like waited on by bellhops. There's like a feeling of like, oh, nobody should have to do this
Dread.
kind of tedium.
Yeah. It's interesting you said I got really fascinated with the automation issue while working as a server and a bartender in a restaurant, which I got a sense that was like obviously there are worse jobs to have, but the just the way it's set up where your employer doesn't pay you, your pay is optional. It felt like incredibly yeah, exactly. But that's actually where I got really fascinated with automation, and that's where I became like a rabid leftist. Is why working in this Uber, this almost libertarian environment, like, oh, you will get what I decide to give you, sir. And that's
Adam's philosophies are always very self-serving.
Exactly. I try to make it for everyone, but it's
I mean, they should be, I guess, right? Shouldn't they?
That's humbling as a former bartender myself, because now I feel like maybe we're just like products of the same education.
Every day Adam was like, somebody needs to automate this job.
Yeah, I was like, how hard could it be? I walk from here to there and I give a guy a beer. Sometimes I spill it on him. We could program that.
It's the soda fountain,
Yeah.
They've had it since the 30s.
Probably. And I'll take a Diet Coke and you'll take your ass over there and get it. Yeah.
So often universal basic income is mentioned as a primary avenue by which to ensure a certain level of resilience to automation. How do you view this idea? Is it appropriate? Is it an appropriate response to automation? Is it a sufficient response to automation? And so 5 is, are there other policies beyond basic income that you find compelling that could ease unexpected bouts of structural unemployment brought on by automation?
I was going to say, I do think basic income is an appropriate response. I don't think it's sufficient.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those things where like you have to at least do this, because if people don't have any money and they have no prospects of ever getting a job again, what have you just done? Like you've condemned millions of people to either become like full-time robbers because that's the only thing available to them, or dying,
or TaskRabbit be a full-time serf.
Yeah, maybe just indenture yourself to some.
I did like
Lord
being a
point.
thief in various RPGs.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's weird how things like TaskRabbit are sort of creating like a middle class elitism, like where there's these give the middle class someone to spit on.
Right.
Well, there was actually an article. The guy normally writes for Bloomberg, and I'm spacing on his name right now. But there was an article in the New Zealand Herald. I'm sure you're all avid readers of that paper of note. But he was saying that, like, who knows? Maybe in the future, we'll have more dancers and more, artisans and stuff that you can just call up on your phone. And I'm like, I don't want to be on the other end of a phone waiting for someone to give me my next dancing gig. It sounds like a court gesture. It really
Art on
like
demand sounds horrible. That's one of the most dystopian things I can imagine. Go paint a picture for me.
It sounds
you
almost
can
like
definitely imagine it though, right? Like you can
Yeah,
see a future where this just happens in the next 10 years.
I can imagine the despair that would lead to that. Yeah, I can definitely imagine that.
It just always strikes me as kind of this neo-feudalism, which is what libertarianism is to me. It's like you got a guy with all the money, and then he pays people to dance for him on Fridays. Him or her, I should say.
Isn't some level of that neo-feudalism somewhat inevitable, kind of considering what we've been seeing here over the past, I don't know, 8 to 12 years? I mean, I would love to see things shake out the way that we could envision them shaking out. But considering who we were given in terms of the actual real possibilities for election to the president, the symbolic head of the country, one doesn't get the sense that they're sort of like chomping at the bit to answer the robot question and to put basic massive structural realignments in place, which is kind of what a basic income is. I mean, I think there's a massive moral imperative for it, and I think that we have every ability out there to do it, especially if you listen to some of the things that Scott Santos has recommended with the land value tax. But again, I mean, these are just like, they're giant cultural ideological changes. So I think I'm kind of, this is sort of, I guess, me being negative tonight, but I'm kind of the mind here that it's gonna have to get darker before the sun comes up, you know.
Adam hates that. I mean, I say that a lot. Adam hates the idea because Adam thinks it shouldn't. He always says it shouldn't have to be.
I completely agree.
A shame. Like it's.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't say that it's inevitable that it would lead that, but it does seem like that's the trajectory we're on. But I don't know that I am prepared to call it inevitable just yet. Maybe that's my own delusion. But
this was actually part of the Keynes essay that I really liked. Is that he was like, the future, we can do whatever we want with it. We're the ones that make it, which is how he ended it. And I was like, that's nice. But I mean, the main thing, like in terms of a universal basic income, that I like, it seems like it's certainly associated with automation, but other people pointed out that, you know, whether it's Andrew Stern or John Danaher, they both suggested that automation or that basic income is a good idea morally, irrespective of automation. Which
right.
Yeah.
I think we came to basic income by looking at automation as an issue, and then it comes up a lot. But then once you find out about it, the more you hear about it, you're like, this is just good anyway. This is just better than like you would expect just hearing about it. It seems to have a lot of value. But I also think that that's not your permanent solution either. And the last question there is like, can you imagine a system that actually makes sense of this? And the only thing I can imagine is personal, like God replicators, where you have a nano device that you're in the woods and you go, build me a hamburger nanobot. Right. And it can just do that. But short of that, I mean, we would have to have such a ideological revolution in this country.
But we'll also get there in steps. So there will be
we might.
Like we'll have
right.
before we have a full on like whatever you wish for a replicator, we'll have 3D printers that can now handle 100 different materials, and some of them are edible. So we'll get to we'll
chair made of Pop-Tarts. Sign me up.
but I sometimes worry that our ability to have an ideological revolution is going to be stunted by the availability of information and ideas that we're constantly exposed to. Now, any new idea, no matter how good it is, there's going to be the jaded, cynical attitude that everyone has about everything, because I feel like we take new ideas for granted. And I almost feel like we're insulated from ideological change. We don't have to hear other people's points out anymore. We can find anything on the internet to back up our own way of thinking, to reinforce.
Well, Casey, to that, I think that goes to your earlier point about how, with the more rapid pace of change and with our just kind of our normal predisposition for processing change, we're really like kind of prone here. We're not prepared, and we're not naturally disposed to adapt this quickly. And with I think with how much information we're getting now, like information is, you have to process it through frameworks and ideologies, and I think we're kind of like becoming more entrenched in our own I worry about this for myself, like what my
It's like a defense mechanism.
right. I mean,
you're
like
saying, for the amount that you're
you're in a
exposed to.
tornado of just info, and like to turn that into knowledge, you kind of have to like put it in some kind of structure, and like we may need new structures, but like while you're just whipped around in this maelstrom, you may just cling to what you have.
I think that is also an argument for basic income, because that's twofold. One, you're essentially born into, at least our American Western late capitalist society, in debt, because you can't live without playing the system's game, and you can't participate in the system unless you take on this kind of debt. So in a way, basic income is like, okay, let's at least start you at zero instead of starting you in the negative. And I think that addresses some of the points that you make, Scott.
I mean, even that dastardly game Monopoly starts you with money.
Right.
That's true. If life were more like Monopoly, that's what I've always said. Just our money would be a lot more colorful.
Directly to jail.
The only other thing I want to point out here is that, well, I guess the main thing for me about what other policies beyond basic income, to me, long in the middle term, this might not be, obviously it won't be a realistic solution just because of the political ramifications, but conceptually, in my mind, the issue, and I think it's related to basic income, is less about how do we redistribute the benefits of productivity and automation, and more like who owns the robots. That becomes kind of the central question. And this is kind of goes back, because we had a conversation with Manu Sadia, the author of Trekonomics, and his point is basically that you mentioned like this object that you say, build me a mansion. I mean, in a sense, it's the replicator from Star Trek, right? Like tea, right. Earl Grey, hot. But his point is that the replicators are public goods. They're not something that one guy owns and then he produces a lot of things and he sells it. It's something.
It'd be impossible for someone to really own that, right? Because if you just go to your friend and say like, "Hey, can you have your replicator make me a replicator?"
Right.
And he's like,
"Okay." You can say no.
That's
kind of like, I feel like the system.
Absolutely
if we don't change
not.
anything, the trajectory on right now is like more and more wealth accumulates to fewer and fewer people until it's just one guy, and then like 7 billion people kill that guy.
Right. I'm all for you. I'm all for that, comrade. But it's interesting to me, like, because we kind of touched on this earlier, but the replicator making another replicator. In my mind, I'm sure you guys have seen. I've been watching the show Westworld, or at least some of you have. There are humans that are like fixing and repairing the robots. I'm like, why not just get a robot to do that shit?
They might be robots.
Okay.
You don't know in that show who's a robot.
I mean, I'm pretty confident that the
Damn, my whole worldview depends on how this plot device turns out.
Yeah.
I mean, that could all be part of the
man.
narrative that Anthony Hopkins created. Those people are all robots. That's the Matrix.
There's a lot of shit getting mixed up right now.
Yeah.
We're all robots. It's the Matrix.
So did we already put out some like real people, and we're just so well programmed that we're like gonna have to be put out by better robots? Or
God,
what if in the past robots were programmed to forget their robots?
M. Night Shyamalan's summer hit.
It's robots all the way down.
But what if we're robots, but like with all biological parts though?
There's nothing productive to be done with the outcome of "Are we robots?"
I'm a really poorly made fat robot. That's all. That's one thing that I'm really irritated about.
What's that about? Who would make a robot that has to poop? You know what I mean?
Well,
that's my counter.
There's probably one in Japan.
Anyway.
They have robots that sweat now, so I think it's probably just a matter of time
That's the
until you
creepiest
have a
human
robot
function for a robot to have.
poops. Apparently, it's pretty effective in boosting its endurance. So
I heard about that.
Athletic performance
for
some reason.
Yeah, it has like a certain number of push-ups it could do, and then it was able to suddenly do more once sweating from its bones became a thing.
It can do now 300 knife stabs. I'm glad there's somebody doing these tests.
Okay. I think we're going to move on to the next question because I don't know what to do with the previous one now. No, but so the next question is something we kind of touched on, but it's more specifically about education. What role does primary and higher education play in a transition to a more automated economy? And just kind of poison the well here, Andy Stern pointed out that education doesn't necessarily lead to job staying power. You see people like journalists, accountants, and people like that all on the line and in the way of automation. So that might not mean anything at all. And of course, I think we're already talking about, will a profession today be at all similar to what it'll be in 5 or 10 years, which is something David Tall pointed out.
Now, I just want to say at the beginning that as a teacher, I have no official stance on this topic.
I will say, as a
Officially.
dick nobody, I have no official stance on anything, but I am of two minds on this one, because I think for however long our current system lasts, I kind of favor vocational stuff. I think kind of like a lot of people are higher education is backfiring on them, but I also feel like we have education has sold its soul in a lot of ways, and educating for the market primarily, and with just the promise of being paid more, having higher status, etc., in the long run, rather than just education as a good per se. That's left us, I think, more vulnerable than we ought to have been. And now, as depressing as this picture is, this is maybe a silver lining, where the thing we have to train people for is an unpredictable future. And I think to do that, you just make, like, you rather than focus on conferring the most labor ready skills, you try to make a citizenry that is like skeptical. They can think critically, they can adapt, they can deal with stress, they don't get participation trophies. Yeah.
All millennials are supposed to get participation trophies. That's what I keep reading.
In my mind, the most valuable thing that I got from college was the ability to navigate information. All the information that's available to us, that is a skill that's more important than it's ever been, is critical thinking. And that should be an overt standard part of public education. And it really isn't. And with the system that's in place, and what the sort of curriculum that's there that teachers have to teach and have to make sure students know, it's those sort of universal skills are sort of being overlooked. Mm-hmm. But I think that is very important in order to make people better able to navigate.
I think that's like extremely important, especially like most people are getting their news from social media, and it's poisoning their minds, and they think that Hillary's a lizard person and whatever. But,
and people believe what they want to believe. Like, you can find something that agrees with. Like, I feel like I sometimes feel like I wish I had the ability to think that things were true because I wanted them to be true. But I know that that's not the case.
What if I told you I'm a lizard person?
I'd probably like if I thought you were sincere, I'd probably nod my head and be like, "Yeah, I know."
I'd worry about you. I'd worry about you.
It's just weird because you meet a lot of people. Well, no, you don't. But you know people who believe in lizard people, but like you never meet a lizard person. It's like
someone who claims to be one.
You think the crazy would go that far? Where some people are like, "Wait, am I one too?" And they try to take off their mask.
We were just arguing like, am I a robot? So there's probably someone out there like, am I a lizard?
It's always weird when you know someone who believes crazy conspiracy theories, and then you present them with another, like the Hollow Earth, and they're like, oh, that's stupid. You're like, what? I don't get your system. I don't understand.
About the education question, I the only thing I want to add is that I think you're right. Like in terms of vocational skills, I'm not sure how. I mean, for stuff like electrician and plumber, those guys are probably going to keep on keeping on. But in terms of, I think we're going to have to be more generalists rather than specialists. Like our whole higher education system is like, I majored in Middle East studies. Casey majored in religious studies. I know someone that majored in actuarial, whatever that means. And so
we're all very wealthy. Don't get us wrong.
Yeah,
we're all rich. beyond belief.
Yeah, I'm broke and I live on a diet of Vienna sausage and jelly. Is pretty much all. No, it's not true. But
Jelly.
I don't know. I couldn't think of any poor people food. I couldn't have jelly.
Zach
But
used to make bologna and potato chip sandwiches.
Oh, hang on.
That just sounds good.
Also,
Used to?
I toasted the
Okay.
bread,
Yeah,
and
so it's fancy.
and I put ketchup on it to make up for things.
Sure.
tomatoes.
So,
You made it from yeah.
Ketchup and chips were my tomato and lettuce.
That sounds like bruschetta
yeah,
to
it's,
me.
it's like a BLT, but for the poorest people.
It's,
on Earth.
it's a poor kid bruschetta. Yeah, but Adam, on the education question, I think so much of this we just can't forecast. I mean, we've talked a lot about what education could be and what it should be. We had a conversation with this guy, Jeff Till, who homeschools his kids and seems to have the perfect life. Damn you, Jeff Till. But he's a big advocate of homeschooling, which is I think something that some people could do. You know, VR is going to open up a lot of opportunities for teaching, for experiencing different types of educational subject matter. Teacher training is going to have to change. But again, I mean, these are like monolithic institutions, at least at the K through 12 end. And it's going to be, I think, a slow moving change unless someone comes out with Khan Academy in 4 dimensions, you know, that like just totally blows the existing institution out of the water. And I think that's kind of unlikely. So I don't know. It's hard to forecast.
Yuval Harari, in a talk he gave at Google Talks on techno-religions, I guess, talked about how no one really knows how to educate kids for the world of 30 years from now. Like, there's not sense we can make about it in a way that we know how to start educating kids at a young age. And I think because of that, because it's anyone's guess, multiple approaches should be taken. So the monolith that is the public education system, I'm more in favor at that point of just abolishing it entirely, having people homeschool their kids with a sufficient basic income, just because, I mean, there's no monopoly on who's going to get this right, and we need a bunch of different tries to even potentially make one functional citizen.
I'd like to add to that one, we nearly raise the money for a basic income just for what we raise per pupil per year in public education. But also, I really do favor, if we're going to implement basic income or basic income-like programs in a piecemeal way, I would like to see it done as anti-poverty measures for children first. So, you know, first of all, it costs less. But, you know, before we got to something like a $12,000 or $13,000 a year basic income, if we had, you know, like $4,000 like Child of America dividend, I think that would prevent so many problems, while still not being kind of all the way to the goalposts. And I think
that's the Scandinavian model, right? I mean they're often cited as these horrible socialist monsters in Scandinavia, but actually they're still working within a free market structure. But they use that money to have these social programs to make sure everybody's needs are met.
Right.
And so, but I think it seems like we're becoming increasingly allergic in this country to social programs. Yeah. And it seems we're more sensitive to things that smack of socialism.
Yeah, I always think of social programs as more or less like bumper lanes on a bowling alley. The bowling alley being capitalism, because it just funnels things in a particular way. And I like, you know.
No, but it's a threat to capitalism, Adam.
I mean, so are those lanes.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the lanes now. If this is the analogy, then the bowling, like the lane part, is such a narrow strip, and you're trying to the rails keep people on track at all. And if you remove them, the gutters are 1,000 miles a piece.
Yeah. Zach, listen. Every gutter ball is just a strike waiting to happen. Okay, like it's gonna happen
It's
to you.
It
Just
could
keep
happen to you
working
if
hard.
you work hard.
It doesn't matter how many times you go into the gutter. You're gonna get that strike.
Pull myself up onto the lane.
I think he just needs to work on his entrepreneurial skills and just invest in himself.
This country has a bowling alley problem, and we're trying to discuss it.
But back to education. I think that the biggest problem with what do we do education wise is, do we educate kids for the world as we want it to be? Like, are we educating them to change things, or are we going to educate them for where it's going, or where it seems like it's going inevitably? And that's the biggest problem. Do we take a leap and say, let's change the paradigm, or do we say, let's make sure you're able to survive?
Casey, you mentioned just the idea of having like an ideological revolution, and how kind of that, I think, is imminent. And I think it's possible that we will have multiple ideological revolutions in short order.
Yeah.
And because of that, we can't really make sense of the world we want in 30 years, because the things that we value in this society currently just may not be the things we value in 30 years.
Sure.
You know, collectively. So if what we value now is like entrepreneurship and having personal wealth and some stability, if in 30 years none of those concepts even make sense,
right?
Like, we've indoctrinated kids in a system that makes it doesn't add up at all then. And then if we try to make the world we hope it'll be, well, we can't really make sense of what these technologies are going to do anyhow. So we may not be better off in either direction.
Right.
It really may just be a free-for-all. So it's like, who knows what the fuck's going to work. Just do something.
Here's an alternative.
Try to make these kids.
That I don't necessarily believe, but just like playing devil's advocate, we have no ideological revolutions, and we just recognize, or the powers that be recognize, that most people are just too stubborn or too overwhelmed to deal with such a thing, and then we just secretly create these programs by, like, you expand Affordable Health Care Act to they just actually cut you a check, and you expand earned income tax credit, and you expand Social Security, like you lower the age, like you just sneak it in there piece by piece.
You just quietly enroll every child in Medicaid. Just take it off.
Quietly enroll them in death panels.
And you start giving people tax breaks they didn't expect. Yeah.
Like, did you guys see the Forrester forecasts in the next 10 years? So you can basically guess maybe that Hillary Clinton will be in office for 8 years. Maybe not. Maybe. Let's just use that as the baseline here. That job loss is going to start happening. So they're going to be scrambling to fix it or to put some kind of salve on it as the economy starts to tank because of the pressure cooker media nuts narrative and the necessity for it too. So what's it going to look like? It's going to depend on whether or not the insane parties we have in government can work together to find some way to address the issue, or we're going to start to see this slow creep towards a more sort of single-minded, I won't say autocratic yet, but that the constitutional decrees that have been used a lot more, the executive decisions that are being pumped out to make decisions without the legislative end. And it doesn't matter if it happens on the right or the left, if it's a Democrat or a Republican. If shit starts to go crazy and they can't make decisions as a government, you'll start to see decisions made in one direction or the other by the executive branch.
So you're saying we're like ripe for despotism either way?
We're ripe for some kind of executive, further executive grab for power. I mean, this is a process that's been happening since September 11th. That hasn't stopped.
I feel like, that makes me really pessimistic. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we're getting a little off topic, but I guess my perspective on this problem of authoritarianism is it kind of comes back to, we have these two options, and then we have these third party options that are dismissed as ruining the chances of whoever one person or another favors. Like Gary Johnson is ruining Donald Trump's chances, Jill Stein is ruining Hillary's chances, whatever. But at the end of the day, the idea that we castigate people for trying to have a more pluralistic political system rather than addressing the actual fact that the political system is not pluralistic at all, is really playing into a lot of these things and getting.
We're in a huge game theoretic dilemma here because of our first past the post voting system. So this will always lead to a duopoly and the spoiler effect. So what I've been wondering, and I'm actually surprised I haven't brought it up with the bros here before, but I'm genuinely wondering this and trying to figure this out in like just my own free time. How do you? Is it even possible? And if so, how do you change a voting system?
I mean, I think it comes down to local initiatives. So there is. I haven't looked into it. Actually, Scott Stanton's wrote about it recently. It was basically about there's a website that states can basically sign up for, and once enough states sign up for this, then they become, instead of winner take all, they become proportional delegate states, like I think Wyoming and some other state that doesn't matter is currently. But so instead of being a winner take all and no one's vote mattering in Texas unless they're that majority Republican, or even in Florida where it's 51% to 49%, the 49% still gets some, their vote still matters a little bit. I mean, I think there are different ways to change the voting system, but gerrymandering is something that both political parties are pro, you know what I mean? And I mean, there are some cases, like I'm sure the Democrats would love a nonpartisan commission to redistrict Texas, and vice versa for the Republicans in, I don't know, Vermont or something. But I mean, I think there are ways to change the voting system, but it comes down to voters caring about the voting system, which right now is just this huge, like, high stakes battle for one job in the country, and that's really all. That's the most energy I see out of our political system is for the presidency.
I'm hoping that this one has been vexing enough to enough people that maybe this could be a topic that gets reinvestigated, because I feel like. Well, I don't know if we actually do have that great of offerings in the third party realm this time, but like I know I personally might roll those dice if I could fill out Hillary as my second choice, and I didn't think my vote was just going in the trash can. So I mean, it would be really interesting too to see those numbers, even if like you didn't get a significant third party turnout. Just I can't imagine it wouldn't be hugely increased if people had that freedom. Like they didn't think it was like basically keep Trump from blowing up the planet, or like vote who you want for.
You'd also see more variety in terms of the folks that actually do get involved.
Yeah. Like for example, I know that in Texas, whoever I vote for, my vote's going to Donald Trump more than likely, because he'll eventually win the state, and I will have given him my vote, the son of a bitch. But although people are saying now that
people are saying Texas is in play. I don't know if I buy it, but let's bring it back to the robot stuff. The political process just depresses the shit out of me. Casey, can you read the last question for us?
Yes. The automobile, the internet, and numerous other advances in technology had far-reaching effects not just on the U.S. economy, but furthermore on society. What impacts and effects do you think continued advances in robotics and artificial intelligence will have on society?
It's worth noting that Kevin LaGranger was like, basically his response was like, well, this is the hardest question. So because it does demand basically just what's gonna happen eventually ever.
Is the question perfectly predict the future?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what?
Yeah, I'm just
because that's what I got from that.
Well, I mean, when I think about like the automobile, like a lot of people say that it led to increases in dating because you didn't have to like go ask some girl's father to take her to the sock hop. You could
horse
just
for the night.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be like, yeah, we're definitely going to the movie, and then you drive to the lake or whatever the hell people did who have more skill than I do. But but there are a lot of social effects that people don't consider, and I'm wondering, in a more automated world, like what might those social effects be?
Well, I can think. I mean, just out of the gate, what I think of is sort of the access that everybody, but in particular, kids will have to the world around them. If cars are automated and you can just tell a telephone that you want to go to the museum or that you want to go to a friend's place or that you want to drive to the Hyperloop station and have lunch with your dad in San Francisco when you're in Boston, that, all those things could potentially come into play. And the world as we know it will become substantially smaller, the physical world. And then we'll expand it in other ways with the augmented and the virtual worlds. But I think that just that alone is going to sort of radically change the experience that people have of being in the world.
My personal hope is that a planet-wide tidal wave of matter restructuring gray goo just reshapes the whole thing into the land of ooh from Adventure Time.
It's worth noting, David Tall and Andy Stern, both their answers to this question were both about work. So David Tall is like, can people find meaning and connection to society when they don't have the connection that having a job brings to society? Because when people think of their job as like, this is how I contribute to society.
And it's their identity. I mean,
I make hot dogs, and then. Right. So that's the other thing, and on a similar point, Andy Stern was like, when we move our lives away from whatever tasks that our job is, and more toward, quote, self-actualization.
Here's the way I think about this, and I think that what may be most important, and this kind of goes back to the education thing, to teach kids is just skill acquisition. And it almost doesn't matter what the skill is, but that process of learning and getting better at something can so easily become meaningful to people. And so in a world where you no longer can derive your personal meaning from selling hot dogs, you have a mechanism that you've been taught since a young age to use to make meaning in the world. It's like, oh, I'll go get good at chess for 10 years.
Sure.
And like that becomes my meaning. Like I have a mission that is disconnected from my occupation because we realize that's a skill we can build.
So basically we need to teach kids how to teach themselves. We need to teach them how to learn, essentially.
And how to
learn.
invest in a pursuit.
Right.
I think it matters too. Because if a kid's just like during around watching like YouTube on his hoverboard for the rest of his life, it's probably going to feel like a meaningless existence. And maybe that will become like a skill in the future that somebody devotes their life to, like a monk who watches YouTube and rides a hoverboard. I doubt it, but
Sounds like you're working on a comic book.
Meaning could be found, I think, easier than occupations in the future, as long as we teach kids how to derive meaning internally.
It's not as easy as a basic income. I think we could issue those checks tomorrow, but like issuing a new paradigm of purpose tomorrow is going to be tough. I think we can do it. I mean, I think people lived and found ways to enrich their experience on Earth long before we had capitalism, long before we had a labor market like we recognize it now. But people are deep in it now, and coming out of it's going to be painful.
Why wait for there to be a universal cultural conscious shift when in the meantime you can make conscious small incremental policy changes? And because like that's the hardest thing to change is a cultural mindset. And
I think it's also the hierarchy of needs. So like we need that kind of like the economic security precondition before we can really start like all launching on the project of self-exploration and self-actualization, which I
Sure.
do think in the long run are the more important projects. But if we're still saddled with the current system, it's going to be like, hurry up and actualize. It's only the actualized people that are valuable to the market. Like, you can't get a job unless you're
Right.
actualized.
Absolutely, yes.
And everyone just becomes everyone else's life coach, and it's the fucking worst circle jerk ever.
Yeah.
We're all Tony Robbins.
The final point, I think the Singularity Bros will appreciate this. Kevin LeGranger pointed out that he sees one of the more far-reaching impacts of this being the blurring of the lines between man and machine.
When you read the question, I was like, I'm so clever. What do you mean society, right? Like, the potentials there for AI and automation are such that the thing that we know as society may just not exist anymore. Like, the configuration of minds may just take on a completely different organization. Maybe it'll be a society. I mean, I guess in some ways it has to be, but it's going to just look, it could, off in the distance, look very, very, very different than anything we meet robots have in store.
I kind of on that point. Robin Hanson has a book called The Age of M. I don't know how familiar you all are with it, but it's about brain emulations, and he makes like the picture he paints is kind of horrifying. I thought it was very interesting, but it was really scary in terms of what society looks like. So he's thinking like you emulate a brain, and then once it's ones and zeros, you can copy it, and there can be thousands of these things, and they're all dedicated to a certain task. And it might not even be a person's brain; it's an AI that we built, and we just copied it, and it can and then you can speed it up to where it can get things done faster than you can think about it, and it becomes a world where everything like is moving around us that we can't even see, and that where all of our needs are met, but there's really nothing at all kind of for us to do. And I think I will say I think he's more on the automation skeptic side in terms of the near future. But when you mention like what society looks like, I immediately recalled, and he has a TED talk on brain emulations if you want to check that out as well. But I immediately called this kind of scary notion of just a world buzzing around us that we don't really understand and probably couldn't understand.
And I think that's largely happening now.
Yeah, I think that's every generation talks, or every previous generation says the new generation, they're antisocial there, but I really do feel like there is a bit of alienation regarding people's relationship to society. And I think technology has a lot to do with it. The stereotype about the millennial who can't talk to someone face to face, and if you call them, they're like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Text me." I think there might be something to that, but I don't want to be too deterministic about it. But again, I think it just gets back to that's something that we're going to have to rise to meet. I don't think it's inevitable.
Well, I mean, this is definitely related to the man and machine blurring of the lines, but I think my final question for you guys, Zoltan Ishvan, anyone? I mean, he's allegedly the the transhumanist candidate.
Sure is.
I think Zoltan...
He's also a children's party magician.
I think Zoltan is going to be very disappointed in the future. I think that the way technology is going to blur the line between man and machine will, like, then as a matter of course, also blur our already kind of specious notion of the self. So I think he thinks he's just going to be put in a like golden Iron Man body and fly around blasting poor people to death or something. But
Whoa, I hope he thinks that.
What we're going to find is that like this phenomenon of intelligence that we're only like at the dawn of understanding. It's these strange, beautiful, novel ways that matter can be patterned and behave that produce these phenomena, and the fact that it's all just located inside one ape's cranium is not going to stay the same it's not going to stay that way forever. Like we will find ways to like rewrite ourselves and merge ourselves and all these things that are really going to just obliterate these boundaries that have for most of our species history just existed in this nice kind of bodily envelope. Once you can plug your iPhone 11 right into your eyeball, I think we're gonna have to revisit those ideas. And this like the whole digital immortality thing, I think, is kind of silly. Like first of all, I've never I've said it on our show. I'll say it here. Like I'm not religious. I've always found these afterlife notions to be scary. Like heaven was also scary to me. Just that like you'd be in some unchanging thing. Like I don't think stasis is the way of the future. And if it's like now the kind of secular tech driven immortality that Zoltan is kind of like he's got a hard on for, it's not going to be like that. And if it is, it'll be miserable. Like you're just going to be some this like golden bot that never changes, and like you just sit there and watch the sun burn out.
There's kind of a tangent. There was a Black Mirror episode about kind of people that when they're on their deathbed and they upload their mind into a virtual reality, or people that are infirmed do this to escape, being in a paralyzed body. And there's kind of this tension, like, so at some point I'm going to get bored of being 25 forever and having sex with like virtual sex with all of the other infirmed and dead people in this world, and it was kind of a horrifying notion because and it's the same thing like when I was a kid and I was raised Southern Baptist, but when people explain heaven and they're like, yeah, you're just gonna go there and you're gonna worship the Lord forever, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I don't know about all that.
Yeah, don't you love going to church? Now you have to do that for eternity.
Yeah, you get to do that all the time.
And they'd say, no, you'll love doing it, and I'm like, so right. I won't be me.
Yeah.
So, and then I started asking, will my consciousness be the same consciousness that it is now, or will my parents were like, shut up?
I don't. I always find it compelling. Christopher Hitchens referred to it as kind of a divine North Korea, and I was like, what I thought was compelling. But
he could turn a phrase. But one of our favorite explorations of these ideas over in Broland is Greg Egan's Diaspora, and
Noise. I was going to.
That's a future where most of the conscious entities are digital, and they just assume every fucking form imaginable. Like you have 13 people make a kid. Minds can like split and copy and diverge and reconverge. They're like some things are gendered, some things aren't. Some things are like there's just every kind of permutation, and it's super fascinating. And one of the oldest characters in there, who may have been like an original upload, he to stay sane, and like whether he's sane or not is also kind of questionable, has like rewritten himself many times, and he's like, I'm more like my great grandparent at this point, or sorry, my great grandchild. Wow. So yeah,
right. I'm my own grandpa. Yeah.
It solved the grandfather's paradox.
Yeah.
And in those two, minds could be put on pause. So say you have to live out the rest of eternity in this universe. You could be like, wake me every trillion years and just show me what's happened. And then you go like, oh, okay, that was neat. And then you go back to bed.
Good God.
Yeah, a lot of the entities, like they choose their kind of subjective rate of experience. So there's like a kind of interstellar
like
colonization
a frame rate
project. Yeah, kind of. I mean, like you can. There's like a shared processing space where like you have to get back on the same clock, but like people can just go into their own worlds for like subjective millennia and like play around with math.
That
doesn't sound that great, actually.
Play around with meth?
Math, but probably meth too.
Yeah.
I love that meth.
I think on that note we've gone we've gone well over time, but I had a great time talking with you guys about these things.
And, what score did we get?
What score did you get? I'll give you. I'm a Montessori guy myself, so I'm going to give you 6 happy squirrels.
6 out of 7 questions.
Oh yeah, no, that was all 7 questions. Yeah, for sure. I thought you wanted a score on being interviewed. I was like, Jesus.
Oh, no.
No, you guys definitely won the podcast.
Yeah.
Did we get the right answers on the questions though?
That's what we're
Oh,
doing.
no,
Yeah. You solved all the problems. We solved all the problems here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, once again, thanks for coming on the program. For everyone out there, be sure to visit these guys at singularitybros.com. I'm Adam Simpson. There's Casey.
Bye, everybody.
We'll see you next time on Future Left Podcast.